The U.S. Constitution, it wasn't delivered as some perfect, finished product. Not at all. It was actually designed to be fixed. So today, we're going to dive into 3 of its most critical updates. These are the amendments that really solved some fundamental flaws in the nation's original code. So here's a big question for you. Is the U.S. Constitution set in stone? It's a really common idea, right? That it's this timeless, unchanging document. But is it really? The answer is a hard no. And the proof? Well, it's built right into the document itself. It's called the amendment process. Okay, the best way to wrap your head around this is to think of it like this. Imagine the Constitution is the operating system for the entire United States, right? Well, then amendments are basically the critical software patches. And we're not talking about small tweaks here. These are essential fixes rolled out to solve major bugs, security flaws, all the big problems that popped up after the system went live. All right, so our first patch, this one deals with a really fundamental question of power. The tug of war between the federal government and the states. We're talking about the 11th Amendment, which took on the whole issue of state sovereignty. So what exactly was the bug here? Well, back in 1793, there was this huge Supreme Court case, Chisholm v. Georgia, and it basically allowed a regular citizen from South Carolina to sue the entire state of Georgia in federal court. Whoa. This caused an immediate uproar. I mean, the states freaked out. They argued this totally undermined their authority, their sovereignty, something they had protected fiercely. It was a full-blown constitutional crisis just waiting to happen. And the fix? That was the 11th Amendment. You can think of it like it installed this protective shield around the states. It's a concept called sovereign immunity. And what it boils down to is this. You can't just drag a state into federal court as a defendant whenever you feel like it. There are specific rules. And the language they used for this patch? It's incredibly direct. It explicitly limits the power of federal courts. It says their jurisdiction shall not be construed to extend to these kinds of lawsuits against a state. I mean, that's a crystal clear, powerful rewrite of the rules. Problem identified, patched, deployed. Okay, so the first fix was all about the power of the courts. The next one, it addressed a massive bug in a totally different part of the system, how we choose our leaders. And that brings us to the 12th Amendment. So the original design for electing a president, it had a serious flaw. Get this, each elector cast 2 votes. Whoever got the most votes became president, and the runner-up, they became vice president. Can you imagine? Well, this whole setup led to the disaster of an election in 1800. Thomas Jefferson and his own running mate, Aaron Burr, ended up tied for president. It threw the whole thing to the House of Representatives and caused this huge political crisis. The system was just broken. But the fix, thankfully, was simple and pretty elegant. The 12th Amendment brought in this new idea of separate or distinct ballots, one for president, one for vice president. So no more runner-up automatically getting the number 2 spot. And that single change, it fundamentally changed American politics. It created the whole party ticket system that we're all familiar with today. So the new patched system became this really clean 3-step process. Step 1, electors meet up in their states. Step 2, they cast one specific vote for president. And step 3, they cast a second, totally distinct vote for vice president. This clear separation was designed specifically to prevent that kind of crazy tie that had almost torn the country apart. But, the programmers of this amendment were smart. They knew that even with this fix, you could still end up in a situation where no single candidate gets a clear majority in the Electoral College. So what's the backup plan? Well, the amendment builds in a really clear contingency plan. If no one wins a presidential majority, the decision goes to the House of Representatives. They choose from the top candidates. And if the vice presidency is still up in the air, the Senate chooses. This division of labor makes sure there's always a constitutional way to get a winner and prevents things from grinding to a halt. Okay, so we've talked about fixes for process and power, but now we need to turn to a fix that addressed the nation's absolute deepest moral contradiction. And honestly, this isn't just a patch, this is a fundamental rewrite of the country's entire code on human freedom. We're talking about the 13th Amendment. And these are some of the most powerful and transformative words in the entire Constitution. Coming right after the Civil War, this amendment finally did what the original document completely failed to do. It explicitly and unequivocally abolished the institution of slavery nationwide. It was a profound and long overdue correction to the nation's founding flaw. But the text doesn't end there. And this is really important. It contains a critical exception. Slavery is abolished, except as a punishment for a crime. That single clause has had a very long, very controversial history, with interpretations that are still being debated to this day. The amendment also had this kind of 1-2 punch. Section 1, the part we just read, lays out the principle. Slavery is abolished. But Section 2, that's the action item. It explicitly gives Congress the power to pass laws to enforce that ban. So it wasn't just a nice idea. It was a grant of real authority to make that idea a reality. So we've looked at 3 amendments that fixed 3 very different problems. What does that reveal when we look at them all together? What does this series of patches really tell us about the Constitution itself? Well, we saw a bug in the court system that threatened the states. We saw a bug in the election process that threatened the stability of the whole country. And we saw the nation's original catastrophic bug when it came to human rights. Each one was a crisis that the original framework just couldn't handle on its own. And what that proves, really, is that the Constitution was never meant to be some static relic sitting under glass. It was built from the very beginning with a mechanism for repair, for improvement. It's a living framework designed to be adapted and corrected by the generations to come. So, the 11th, 12th, and 13th Amendments solved the crises of their time. And that leads to the really essential question for our time. What are the bugs in our current operating system? And what critical patches will the next generation, maybe even our generation, need to right?